Like I said, City Duval open house for the 3rd Avenue reconstruction project. We are in preliminary design, and we are just interested in sharing with the community and having an open house. We had one at noon, fairly well attended, about the same amount of folks here, so that's perfect. And it'll take us, half an hour-ish to get through the presentation, and then we have plenty of time for Q&A. The visuals should help us along the way, so I think we can get started. Just some basic meeting ground rules that we are all now very efficient at virtual meetings. Respectful and appropriate comments, please. We will be recording it and posting it. There should be, you will have opportunity afterwards as well for a survey. We will be using the chat, so feel free to ask questions as we go. We have plenty of staff on hand to help answer Q&A in the chat. When we get to the end and do the Q&A, little raise hand button will get to everybody as we try to get them in order. If you are on a phone, *9 and *6 gets you. *9 is raising your hand. *6 gets mute on mute. And with that said, here we go. So this is City Duval working on its 3rd Avenue project. So we have City Duval staff as well as KPG SOMAS, our consultant. So I'm Steve Loniszewski, Director of Public Works. We have Project Manager Gavin Harold on the line. Sarah Ruin out of our office is with us. And then with the KPG team, I think everybody's actually here, but Olivia Parashiv, Grant Thomas, Ray Edrelin, Corinne Schmidt, Fong Nguyen, and Hope Freegee. And we will take you through the thoughts and moving forward with 3rd Avenue. So Olivia, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So our agenda for this evening are going over project goals, give you a background and timeline of what's happened thus far. We'll go through what the design goals and elements are for the project. We'll also be giving a project overview, and we'll be showing you some design layout options that we've come up with the city. We'll also be talking about improvement opportunities for the corridor, and a quick summary of an arborist report that's been completed for the project, and also give you some ideas for traffic calming and placemaking elements that we're thinking about for the project. And then we'll have a Q&A session right after that, and what the next steps are. And next slide. So I'll hand it back to Steve for a little bit of project goals.
Thanks, Olivia. Hopefully everybody can hear well, and if you can't at any time, just raise your hand and we'll either get closer or turn our volume up. So the project itself is our 3rd Avenue project. Not stepping back just a little bit from goals, but the city creates planning documents in 20-year terms, 6-year terms for the most part. So the 20-year comprehensive plan sets up the guidelines for how the city intends to grow. And then within the transportation planning 20-year document, we look at projects in 6-year chunks, and we annually update those as required by the state. So 3rd Avenue, as you all are aware, is one of our only north-south connectors from city limit lines to city limit lines. So Big Rock to Cherry Valley are the city's bounded limits, north and south. And first, Main Street as well as 3rd Avenue do go both through town, north and south. You have 275th and then Baton Road to the east, kind of bookending the city limits. The project, we are trying to bring 3rd Avenue up to a more current and appropriate standard for the situation the city is in with expanded growth, lots of high use in the vicinity, and its current rural status, no sidewalks, curb and gutter, etc. So we'd like to construct the full roadway. Our plans call for not only travel lanes, but bike lanes, pedestrian and shared use lanes, some intersection and traffic improvements, as well as lighting. Traffic calming measures are going to be a high priority. We have had plenty of complaints about speeding on the corridor. So mini roundabouts, chicanes, which is a purposeful curve in the road, narrowing lanes or narrow lanes, and then bulb outs. We'll be looking at some placemaking features in areas that have a nice space to share and places to sit, look, like the Clemens Creek crossing, some wider areas for bus stops or other placemaking needs as they fit the corridor.
So again, I'm Olivia Paraska with KPG Somis. We're a local design firm who specialize in roadway, streetscapes, and all things related to public transportation projects. We've been fortunate enough to be working with the City of Duval's public works staff for a good dozen years or so on several fun projects, including the SR 203 Main Street, Phase 1 and 2. And so we're happy to be here working with the city again on the 3rd Ave North project. So this graphic shows a timeline of what we've done so far and what's to come in the future. We began our work in September last year, and during the fall, we worked on completing a transportation study, which analyzes the existing and future forecasted traffic flows to ensure that the proposed roadway lane configurations will accommodate future growth and development of the area. We also completed a field survey. You probably saw our field crew out there in the fall. And so we prepared a CAD-based map that's being used for this preliminary phase and can be used up to final design. We also had a licensed arborist complete an inventory of existing mature trees, and she's prepared a draft arborist report. And Corinne will talk a little bit more about that later. In the winter of last year, we worked with the city to prepare to design options on scroll plots that we'll be going over today. We also have a sub-consultant working with us, geoengineers, and they've prepared a draft critical areas report, which summarizes the environmentally sensitive areas found within the project area. They've also completed a draft geotech report and are currently completing a report for the hydraulic analysis and conceptual design for the Clemens Creek culvert, which will be upsized to be a fish-bearing culvert. KPG Somis is also finalizing a stormwater memo that will summarize what the existing drainage basins are and determine what the stormwater detention and water quality requirements will be for each design option. Those last two reports will be completed in the next few weeks, so we're almost there with all our deliverables. So that brings us to today, which is our first open house, community open house, second time today. So the purpose of today and the property owner meetings that have happened thus far is to present you the information, the design concepts, and receive your questions, feedback, concerns, comments. And then next month, we will be compiling the feedback received and revising the design as appropriate. And then in May, we'll be presenting our findings to council and other committees as needed and get consensus of what the preferred option will be that will be carried through final design and construction later this year and beyond. Next slide, please. So our design goals are to create a context sensitive design based on public feedback. This is your neighborhood, you know it best. So we really do care and want to hear any existing issues that you're experiencing out there, whether it be safety concern, drainage issues, access issues, or anything like that. We also want to provide a continuous facility for peds and bikes to travel through 3rd Ave. Third Ave already has some very nice traffic calming characters that we will maintain and enhance. And the corridor has some really wonderful mature trees, and it's something that the city emphasized to us in the scoping phase that they want to preserve that as much as possible. So we'll be doing what we can to avoid impacts to those trees or mitigate impact with flexible design approaches. We also want to integrate placemaking features at key locations, including at the Clemens segment and at the intersections. Next slide, please. So this summarizes the design elements that I've talked about a little bit already, but a couple of things I'd like to mention includes the second bullet point, which is property restoration needs. So we haven't gone beyond horizontal design layouts yet. We just want to establish the footprint. But when we proceed with final design, we'll be looking at grading. So with the widening of the roadway, we may need some new retaining walls at the back of sidewalk, especially north of Kennedy. There's some more challenging topography there. We'll be providing new concrete driveway entrances for each parcel and match your existing driveways in kind. There might be a need to restore disturbed landscape areas and relocating mailboxes and fences and those kinds of things that will be flushed out later in design. The right-of-way width is typically 60 feet. There are some areas where it widens to 90 feet north and south of Kennedy Street. So our aim with the layouts and kind of the reasoning behind it is we wanted to keep improvements within the right-of-way, which is achievable for a great part of the project. We also will aim to match existing frontage improvements and sidewalks, given that they're in good condition and are ADA accessible. Another thing I want to point out on the graphic is the fact that there's a possibility of constructing this project in 2 phases. So the current city currently does not have full construction funds secured for the entire project limits. So we'll be going after different state grants in the next coming months. And then just to be aware that the construction may be split up depending on available funding at the time. Next slide, please. So project overview, we're looking to improve 3rd Ave from 143rd Place to Stevens Street. So north is pointing to the right on the aerial. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll be referring to 3 distinct roadway segments. We're calling the south segment, which extends from 143rd to Kennedy. The Co-Clement segment runs from Kennedy to Park, and then the northern segment runs from Park to Stevens. Next slide, please. So starting with the southern segment, we saw some intersection improvement opportunities, including installing mini roundabouts at 143rd and 145th. These 2 cross streets have higher traffic volumes compared to the other side streets, and they're really the ideal location to place this type of intersection control. So to orient you, the photo simulation is of 143rd looking south. So we'll be matching into the newly constructed curb returns on the south side. There is a slight skew to the intersection, but we were able to fit in more of an oblong shaped roundabout within the right-of-way. This intersection treatment helps with traffic flowing more efficiently than compared to a 4-way stop control. It does also help with traffic calming. These are designed for 15-mile-per-hour travel, and typical vehicles would be able to maneuver this easily, but we will be using some mountable curb because 3rd Ave is sometimes used as a truck detour route when there's work being done on 203. So this will accommodate those larger trucks as well. We also have an opportunity to incorporate some decorative pavements or other artistic treatments within the roundabout, which Corinne will give you some examples of that later. Next slide. And then moving a little bit north from that location, still within the southern segment, this photo sim you're looking at is northbound approaching Kennedy Drive. There is an existing chicane in the roadway, which is a great traffic calming measure. This graphic also shows what our typical section is, which is the city standard for this type of roadway. 2 11-foot through lanes, 5-foot bike lanes on both sides, curb and gutter, 5-foot planter, and 6-foot sidewalks. So we'll be installing new illumination that's appropriate for the street, and street trees also throughout the corridor. This photo sim also alludes to the flexible design options we're talking about. So typically we would show the sidewalk right next to planter strips, but in this case, on the right side of the graphic there's an existing tree that was identified to be wanting to be preserved and protected. So we have the option to jog the sidewalk behind that large tree to minimize impacts to that tree. And we're able to do this because this is the area where the right-of-way widens to 90 feet. Next slide, please. So that covers the southern segment in general. With the two options we prepared, the southern segment is exactly the same. We found that this layout and within this area was the best use given the parameters and existing topography we're working with. And it does achieve the goal of providing that continuous facility for all modes of travel. But moving on to the Cole Clemens and northern segments, we are dealing with different existing conditions and topography. So we came up with two different roadway cross sections that Corinne will be discussing.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, so zooming in just a little bit here to the left, we have the crossing over Clemens Creek. And then to the right, what we're calling the northern segment. And they vary from the southern segment, like was mentioned previously, mostly due to constraints with right-of-way and topography. And so that's what's kind of causing the differences in the section. And actually, sorry, I'm going to step back a little bit. What we're going to look at next here is basically if you took a slice through the roadway here and looked north, that's what we're going to be looking at. So starting with the Clemens Creek crossing section, we would transition to a 5-foot bike lane in the northbound direction with a shared travel lane or sharrow in the southbound direction, and then a 5-foot sidewalk that would be directly adjacent to the roadway. There would be some requirements for walls and railings and opportunity possibly for some overlook areas through this section. The reasoning for the bike lane traveling northbound had to do both with topography and also with kind of the patterns of how kids and families might move through the corridor, generally heading north in the mornings to school when they might be on the road at the same time as commuters, and in the afternoon when they might be coming home, they might be ahead of that commute time, so less traffic on the roadway. So those were kind of the factors that led to this northbound selection for the bike lane. Moving to option 2, this takes the bike lane off the roadway and combines it with the sidewalk into a 2-way shared use path. So this would be 2-way for bicycles and pedestrians, and it would add a 5-foot buffer to separate those non-motorized users from the vehicle traffic. So there's a few pros and cons to both of these options.
Corinne, I think you went on mute somehow.
I am so sorry. My headset has a very useless little button that every once in a while I hit with my elbow. I'm sorry for that. Stepping back, so I don't know where you lost me, but pros and cons. With the on-street bike facilities, it's a little bit easier for cyclists that are carrying through to, integrate with the on-street bicycle network at either end, because they're already on the correct side of the road, traveling in their, desired direction of travel. The downside of this option is that it increases this curb to curb roadway width, which is kind of the perceived width that drivers see of the road, which has kind of adverse impacts on to traffic calming, right? The roadway appears wider, people feel more comfortable going a bit faster. So option 2, kind of lessens that concern by bringing the curbs in on the travel lane, again adding what could be a planted buffer potentially with street trees that would visually narrow the roadway. And then also the shared use path is a more comfortable potentially facility for families or less confident bicyclists, people like that, with the downside being that when you get to the end of the path at the north or south, you have to then potentially cross the road to get into an on-street bike lane or something like that. So at the top here, just a couple of examples of what this might look like: a standard 5-foot bike lane and a shared use path with a planted buffer here. So moving north from there into the northern segment, very similar, but we gain a little bit of extra width that we can utilize to add a 5-foot buffer to option 1 as well. And again, that just helps with that visual narrowing of the roadway and also provides a measure of buffering and safety for the pedestrians. And for option 2, it's essentially the same as across Co-Clemens, only with the a little bit of added width to the shared use path as a shoulder. So, okay. So with all of this talk about the width of the roadway, I want to just touch on the arborist report that was done. We had a licensed arborist on our team who did an evaluation of all of the existing mature trees along the corridor, and coming at it from the perspective of, the goal is to weave these street improvements in and among the existing tree canopy to the extent possible. So the primary goal of the arborist work was to determine which trees may be affected by these proposed improvements, evaluate the health of the trees out on the corridor to see if there are any trees that either are very significant and worth preserving, but also if there's any that might have some hazardous characteristics or might not be in the best of health, so that we can plan for both of those through design and make arrangements accordingly. So and lastly, we looked at, there's some existing frontage improvements, so we would be looking to preserve those and build upon them on what's out there. And so really the most important takeaway from this is that there's been no decisions made about individual trees at this point, but just that we're making sure that those considerations are integrated at the ground floor of design. And like Olivia mentioned, so that we can take design measures to bring the sidewalk around a very significant tree or things like that if deemed appropriate. So in terms of traffic calming, we have a few elements that are going to be part of the mix out as part of this project. Roadway chicanes, which are basically just an intentional bend in the roadway that helps to slow people down. Third has some natural chicanes, and those we intend to preserve as part of the design. Mini roundabouts, as Olivia mentioned, they provide smoother traffic flow than stop control, but also help to slow that through traffic and force people to integrate and move around the roundabout. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we can integrate some fun placemaking into the roundabout option. There are some existing curb bulbs where we have on-street parking, and so those would ideally be maintained, possibly extended a bit. But again, the idea is visually narrowing the roadway, narrowing the crossing distance for pedestrians to keep that kind of slow nature to the roadway. And then the last one here is just keeping the lanes narrow so that people don't feel, if we give them acres and acres of pavement, people will feel very comfortable doing 40 miles an hour. So we want to make sure that that 25 feels like a comfortable speed for this road through narrowing the lanes. And then the last thing we wanted to touch on was what this all could look like. So There's lots of opportunities to add design details throughout the roadway that can help this feel like a really great place that fits in with the neighborhood. You know, ideally looks like it belongs, like maybe it's always been there and it's something that the neighborhood can really be proud of. So, you know, various elements that might be included at Co-Clemens. There's the potential for a small overlook area with, you know, perhaps some seating, decorative pavement. There certainly will be the potential for retaining walls along the corridor. You know, enlarged pavement at areas at the corners, so where kids might be waiting for the school bus, things like that, providing a little bit more generous pavement space, and that's an opportunity to do something just a little bit above like a standard sidewalk pavement in those locations. We'll also be looking at lighting appropriate to the corridor. And how, you know, we can use decorative luminaires that might have kind of express a nice neighborhood character, but also with a goal to make sure that the lighting levels are appropriate for the type of neighborhood that this is as well. And then lastly, you know, in the roundabout, there's all kinds of fun opportunities for what we can do in that paved space, even though it might get, you know, driven over by buses or things like that. We want to, you know, work with the community and possibly come up with fun treatments. As you can see here, this probably isn't Duval, but you know, it just shows kind of the extent of what's possible out there. And so with that, that is the end of our formal presentation here, and I'm going to pause for 1 second to let Fung stop the recording.
Thank you.